ready?
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to begin this last session by doing a final meditation, just to reflect a little bit on our motivation in our life, and also to dedicate everything we've done this weekend. So if you want, you can use the corpse posture for this meditation or sit upright, as you like. So again, we begin by preparing the body, setting it into a state of relaxation, stillness, and vigilance. And relaxing more deeply with each out breath. And with each out breath, letting go of any thoughts that may have arisen. And allowing the mind to come to rest in the present moment. Focusing on the sensations of the breath throughout the body. We all want to be happy, And we all want to be free of suffering. And it often seems to us as if the source of our happiness and the source of our suffering is out there in the world. And as a result, one of the main methods we often use to try to find happiness and to try to overcome suffering is that we try to manipulate the things around us. We try to attract people, places, and things that seem to be the source of our happiness. And we try to push away or avoid people, places, and things that seem to be the source of our suffering. But is this an effective strategy? Are we getting any closer to genuine happiness and overcoming suffering? Or are we simply trapping ourselves in the hope-fear cycle? Hoping for pleasant experiences and fearing or worrying about unpleasant experiences. And if we don't get the things we want, we often become very frustrated. And even if we do get the things we want, they never really fully satisfy us, and we simply end up craving for more. And we often end up with a lot of dissatisfaction when things don't live up to our expectations. So what's the solution? According to Buddhism, we're simply looking in the wrong place. What would happen if we turned our attention to our own mind? What would happen if we began to cultivate more mindfulness? If we developed a more calm, clear, and focused mind? And what would happen if we reduced our mental afflictions, such as anger, craving, jealousy, and anxiety? And what would happen if we could begin to see things more clearly, without projecting or distorting what we apprehend? And we began to cultivate loving kindness and compassion for ourselves and others. And instead of reacting to things out of old habits, we began to respond in ways more conducive to our own and others' happiness. And what would happen if we could begin to see difficult situations in our life as opportunities for growth, rather than seeing them as problems or obstacles? So let's set a positive motivation. A motivation wishing to discover practical methods to overcome suffering and find genuine happiness. A motivation wishing to engage in practices such as this Vipashyana practice to enable us to strive for that goal of genuine happiness. We can expand our motivation out to include others, wishing also to help those around us to overcome their suffering and find genuine happiness. And then in conclusion, we can dedicate all the positive potential that we've gathered through our time together this weekend towards that goal. And again, as I recite the dedication prayer from great Indian Master Shantideva, you might like to think about the words of the prayer. May all beings everywhere, plagued by sufferings of body and mind, obtain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature commit evil or fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled with a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are warm with toil be restored on finding repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drinks. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find hope, constant happiness and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be freed from their ailments. Whatever diseases there are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid, and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power, and may people think of benefiting each other. For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then may I too remain to dispel the miseries of the world. So we can begin now with just a short summary of what we've covered this weekend. And then we can have a look at how to best integrate this Vipashyana practice into our life. Within all of the various Buddhist traditions that we've sort of briefly looked at this weekend, we can talk about three core areas of practice. Called the three higher trainings. The first of those is ethics, which is translation of Sanskrit word shila. Ethics, of course, is not only the foundation of any Buddhist tradition, but I think it's the foundation of any sort of meaningful lifestyle. And here, of course, the essence of ethics is to avoid harming others, avoid harmful, non-virtuous behavior. And then on that basis, the second area of practice is concentration, in Sanskrit, samadhi. So if concentration practice, of course, is to develop a calm, clear, and focused mind. So within the Buddhist spiritual path, there are many levels of samadhi that we can cultivate. The minimum level of samadhi that is necessary is called shamatha, Sanskrit word for calm abiding, usually translated as calm abiding. So often the concentration practice, particularly in the Mahayana traditions, is often simply called shamatha practice, because that's the level of concentration we're attempting to cultivate. Because on the basis of this shamatha, a calm, clear, and focused mind, this is an effective basis for all the other practices. And of course, the main practice that we've been looking at this weekend is the Vipashyana practice. Another name for this is, of course, the wisdom practice. And wisdom in Sanskrit is prajna. But again, often this wisdom practice is referred to as vipassana or Vipashyana practice. Of course, as we've mentioned briefly, this wisdom practice we need to balance with the other main wing of practice of compassion. And these are often referred to as the two main wings of practice. So, of course, this weekend, the emphasis has been on this aspect of all of the training, the wisdom practice, the Vipashyana practice. And we saw here that in the Vipashyana practice, there are at least 4 ways in which we distort reality. So there are 4 types of insight we are trying to cultivate in the wisdom of Vipashyana practice, which, remember again, were the first was to come to realize impermanence, that everything is changing moment by moment. And if we can really cultivate this and come to directly realize impermanence, then this is going to have an effect of course, of reducing attachment. Because then if we can see experientially that things are changing moment by moment, then there's nothing to grab hold of. So we can simply enjoy our pleasant experiences without that craving and attachment. So often in the meditation texts, what is listed as a direct antidote to attachment is to reflect on impermanence. But of course, realizing impermanence is going to be an effective basis for the second insight. and that is to realize dukkha, or suffering, to come to realize the nature of the type of existence we find ourselves in. Because by reflecting on impermanence, realizing impermanence, that will at least help us to realize the second level of dukkha, the idea of change, that pleasant experiences are not really in the nature of happiness because they're constantly changing. And coming to realize dukkha will help us to understand that there's no happiness to be found out there, that actually the source of happiness and suffering is within ourselves, and thereby that will help us to develop the aspiration for liberation, this idea of renunciation. So that, then once we have that aspiration for liberation, understanding the source of suffering is within ourselves, then we can eliminate that source of suffering, which here is seen to be this grasping onto self. So the insight we are to develop here is the wisdom of no self. And if we can cultivate this wisdom of no self, realize there's no autonomous me, we can achieve the goal of nirvana. And then on those basis of those three insights, we also looked at the fourth insight into emptiness. To come to realize there's no independent me, no independent objective world. And in the Mahayana traditions, this is seen to be the fundamental ignorance that we're suffering from. And if we can come to realize this emptiness within the Mahayana tradition, then we can achieve the goal of enlightenment. So these were the four aspects of Vipassana or Vipassana practice that we had a look at this weekend. Now, as we see here, this wisdom practice is coming within a larger framework. So it's very important that the Vipassana practice is within that framework, that we integrate the Vipassana practice into that framework, and that we integrate Vipassana practice into daily life. Because practice is not just about sitting down and meditating, but practice is also about what we do for the rest of the day. So that's what I'd like to look at a little bit now in terms of integration. And one way of looking at integration is we can look at it in terms of integrating three things. The first is view. And here, of course, view means philosophical view. So here, then, philosophical view means to cultivate and develop the correct philosophical view, the correct view of reality. So here, to come to develop the correct view of reality by coming to correctly understand impermanence, dukkha, no self, and emptiness. So we can cultivate this correct intellectual view of reality, because then this will be the framework for our practice. And so then the next part of integration is on the basis of correct view, we can meditate. And so within meditation, of course, we can understand that we go through those three stages. We talked about go, nyam, tok. So go, intellectual understanding, is really about developing the correct philosophical view. And then we bring that into practice and we meditate on this philosophical view to come to experience and realize impermanence, dukkha, no self, and emptiness. So this is the meditation practice. And then, of course, we need to integrate those with what's called conduct. Conduct means daily life conduct. And so here, as we've seen, the basis of that conduct is ethical lifestyle. And particularly here, ethical lifestyle can also be informed through our meditation and view. Because if we really understand in our philosophical view and meditation that there is no independent me, independent world, that everything's interdependent, then of course that is a very effective basis for our ethical lifestyle. Because actually it would become illogical to harm others understanding this idea of interdependency. So that is also where this integration helps, is that even though ethics, we often say, is the foundation on top of which we build concentration and wisdom, also the wisdom in terms of view and meditation will also, of course, improve our ethical basis. So that's why we need the integration. Also, of course, with conduct, to be effective, we need to really simplify our life, because we need time to develop philosophical view and to meditate and reflect on these things. But of course, the reality is that in our modern lives, we don't tend to have very simple lives. In fact, we fill up our life with lots of stuff. We're very busy. And then often, you know, people come up and go, well, I'd like to meditate, but I don't have any time. And it's probably true with our current lifestyle. Probably we don't have any time. But that's not really a valid excuse, because if we look at our life, then we can see that certain activities we do every day, of course, are essential. Probably most of us need to do some sort of work to earn enough money to have a roof over our head and food in the stomach. Maybe some of us have also got some family responsibilities, and maybe there's a few other activities that are essential. But on top of these essential activities, we tend to fill up our day with a lot of stuff. And a lot of this stuff is not very beneficial or helpful even. And often we do that for two reasons. One, we do that because often in our modern society, it's sort of seen that if you're not doing something, you're not being productive. So do something, anything, just do something. And also, of course, if we're not doing anything, then that forces us to look at our mind. We don't like what we see, so we often just busy ourselves, distract ourselves, because we can't deal with this. And that is a symptom of what's called action addiction, which we have in our modern society. And there was a very nice experiment they did regarding this, and I mentioned this, I think, last week sometime, is that I think it was Time magazine did the study. And what they did was they had a plain room, so there was no sensory stimulus in the room. They had a chair in the middle of the room, and then people had to sit in this chair for 15 minutes. There was nothing to occupy their minds with. All they had was they gave them a little device that could give electric shock. That's all they had. And they had them sit there for 15 minutes. As it turned out, and men fared worse than women here, 65% of men preferred to give themselves electrical shock than sit quietly with their own mind. In fact, I think one person shocked himself 90 times or something in 15 minutes. Women were a bit better. Only 25% of women preferred to give themselves electrical shock than sit with their mind. For 15 minutes, that was all. So that's how much we're addicted to doing something. So of course, if we're like that, then of course we're not going to have time. So rather than forcibly cutting things out of our life. I think what's helpful is just to look at our life. What are our priorities in life? And from a Buddhist perspective, two things that can help with that is reflecting on precious human life and death. To really reflect on this precious opportunity we have and the fact it's not going to last forever. And if we really reflect on these, I think what you'll find is that a lot of these things we fill up our life with, we're going to look at them and we'll see that they're just a waste of time. We're not going to want to put any time into them. And this often happens with people who've had so-called near-death experiences. They've directly seen death and come back, and often that is very transformative. Often that person has a completely new perspective of life. They see the absolute preciousness of life and how it's not going to last forever. So often they're full of enthusiasm for life, and they simply don't want to waste one moment of their life on meaningless tasks. So we don't need a near-death experience to have that. And in fact, an even more extreme example of this was a few years ago when I was giving a course in Dharamsala in India. One of the students was a Irish lady who worked in the hospice movement. And after class, I was talking to her, and she said that it wasn't uncommon, because she was helping terminally ill people. She said it wasn't uncommon for people to tell her that, if they get past the first phase of denial, if they get past that to their stage of accepting that they've only got 3 months or 6 months to live, if they got to that step, she said it wasn't uncommon for the people to tell her that getting the terminal illness was the best thing that happened to them in their entire life. Because for the very first time they could appreciate life, and they wanted to make whatever time left they had meaningful. So she said it wasn't uncommon for people to tell her that. Of course, we don't need to have a near-death experience or terminal illness to have that same aspiration. We just need to reflect on precious human life and death, and then we can also have that same state of mind, seeing the preciousness of life is not going to last forever. Let's make it as meaningful as possible. Then I think what you'll find, all these extra things we fill up our life with, when we're just going to lose interest. We're not going to want to do them. And then suddenly we'll have time and energy to devote to meditation and more meaningful things. And also on that regard, there was, and probably many of you are aware of this, there was a Australian lady who was working in the hospice movement for many years, and she used to interview people who were close to their dying about their biggest regrets in life. And the number one regret, she, over those 20 or 30 years of asking, the number one regret was regretting having worked too hard, too much time at work, not enough time with family, doing other meaningful things. So we don't want to be one of these people full of regrets later in our life. We just reflect on our life, and the preciousness of it, and then we have good priorities in our life, and then we'll find time, we'll want to meditate and develop ourselves and help others in that way. Now, on that point, then often people also have a little bit of a, not confusion, but they're not sure what to do, because once people start to think like this, then often they come up with this dilemma. They often think, should I do the career thing or should I do the spiritual thing? Which one should it be? And then what unfortunately happens is people abandon their career and they think, okay, I'm going to be spiritual now. Yeah, but what am I going to do? I don't know. And then, of course, if we think like that, then we're going to find difficulty, because we've probably given up the one thing we're good at, the one thing that's providing us some financial support. What are we going to do with our life? So rather than doing that, we should be looking at how to integrate the two, because we need a way of benefiting society. And if we've given up our career, maybe the one thing we're talented at, how are we going to benefit society? So therefore, if we can integrate the two and use a more spiritual view of life in our career, and use that talent that we have to benefit society in much better ways. I think this is how we are to look. Of course, if we're in a career that we're only in it because we can earn a lot of money, and it's not really of any benefit, and we want to do something else that we're more talented at, then that could be a choice to make. But just to simply give it up and to be spiritual, I think, is not very sensible idea. And then the last point on conduct that I think is very important, that I tend to emphasize a lot these days, is the idea of sangha, of spiritual community. Because if we really want to have a more meaningful life and head in a better direction, then sangha or spiritual community, I think, is, for us as beginners at least, is essential. And I know from personal experience, because if we want to change our life, unfortunately, there's a few things getting in our way. The biggest thing getting in our way, of course, is our old habits. And secondly, of course, what's going on in society tends to be pushing us in the opposite direction as well. And as a beginner, it's very hard to work against these currents. So if we can find a sangha, spiritual community, meaning find like-minded people and get involved with them, get support, maybe meet together regularly, maybe meditate together, get some support, then you'll feel like you're not the only person. Otherwise, you'll probably just get swept away. And that's what happened to me. So I can really suggest that to find a sangha is going to make it a lot more likely that we can actually start to implement these ideas. So if we can really find that support, then daily life conduct, implementing that is going to be much easier. One more thing I want to mention then is how to maybe then structure our day based on this sort of principle of integration. So of course, in terms of meditation, one of the key phrases is for success is continuity, meaning to have a daily meditation practice. So for that daily meditation practice, it's very much recommended to do it first thing in the morning, because that's the time where usually we're most fresh. Usually we can dedicate that time. And also, of course, it's a very good way to start the day. And with a daily meditation practice, one of the most difficult things with it is simply to develop the habit. So if we keep changing the time when we meditate, we're not really developing a habit. So very helpful to pick a time and stick to that time. Every morning at this time, that's meditation time. And then also with meditation, one of the key phrases is quality over quantity. So again, it's much better to meditate a short time with focus than sit there for a longer time simply getting dull and spaced out. So always emphasize quality over quantity. If you want to meditate a longer time but you can't maintain focus, then break that time into 2 or 3 sections and take a little 2-minute break in the middle. Also very much recommended to meditate a fixed amount of time, because if we don't meditate a fixed amount of time, what often happens is on days we sit down, on days where things are going very difficult, maybe we're completely sleepy or completely agitated or distracted, we sit down to meditate, we try for 5 or 10 minutes, nothing's really working, and then we just give up. That's not very good, because one of the things that we really need to develop in life in general, but certainly in practice, is perseverance. And if every time things get a little bit difficult, we give up, that's not a good habit to get into. So if we set a timer, maybe whatever time it is, then on days where things are going difficult, we'll keep persevering until the time is up. So that's good for developing perseverance. And on other days, if we don't set a timer, if things are going very well, we're meditating and things are going really well, then we usually often keep meditating because things are going so well. But then we keep meditating until it's not going so well and we stop. And the thing you remember most about meditation is how it ended. So if we're always ending in dullness, distraction, frustration, we're going to start to associate this with meditation. We're not going to want to meditate again the next day. Whereas if things are going well, the time it goes, we stop. That's the thing we remember most. We'll be enthusiastic. We'll want to meditate again the following day. So that's a little bit about the structure of the meditation. What to meditate on in the morning. Of course, there are many choices. But as we saw from the previous page, the three core elements, ethics, concentration, wisdom, and the wisdom to be balanced with compassion. So what we can understand from that is that the concentration or shamatha practice is the basis of all the other meditations. Because if our mind is not very calm, clear, and focused, it's very difficult to engage in any other practice, because we try Vipashyana practice, we get distracted, compassion practice, we get distracted, nothing really penetrates. So if we as a beginner find that our mind is very easily distracted and dull, I think as a beginner, we should be emphasizing shamatha practice to really work on cultivating a stable, clear mind. And then on that basis, then we can also start to engage in Vipashyana practice, and we have those 4 variations of impermanence, dukkha, no self and emptiness, and then to balance that with some compassion practice in terms of those 4 immeasurables and Tonglen. Then, of course, what we're meditating in the morning, we need to bring that into the day. So remember, practice is meditation plus what we do the rest of the day. So what can we do the rest of the day to continue to cultivate what we're working on in the morning? One of the key elements here again is mindfulness. Because without mindfulness in daily life, it's going to be very hard to cultivate any of these things during the day, because we're just going to get caught up in our old habits. So therefore, again, the shamatha practice is going to be very helpful in strengthening that mindfulness. And then in daily life, to further cultivate that mindfulness. And of course, it's very good at the beginning of the day to just say, I'm going to be as mindful as I can throughout the day. But I think on top of that, to help remind us to be mindful, it's very useful to use triggers, to have things remind us to be mindful through the day. Triggers can take a number of different forms. One very practical trigger is pick certain activities that we regularly do each day and always make an effort to be present with that activity. Example, brushing teeth, eating meals. So, of course, now what we tend to do is we're rushed in the morning, we're brushing the teeth quickly while we're thinking about all the things we have to do that day. And then we run out the door and we don't even remember if we've brushed our teeth. So when you're brushing your teeth, be present with that. Be present with the sensations on the teeth and the gums and everything that goes with brushing the teeth. And not brush teeth and think about all the things we have to do at the same today. Similarly, when you're eating meals, what we tend to do now, of course, is we're rushed, we're running late, we're eating lunch very quickly because we have to get back to work, and we're not even really enjoying the meal. And we're all stressed about all the things we have to do that afternoon. So therefore, when you're eating the meal, be present. Be present with the food and the eating and the sensations. And that way, we're cultivating mindfulness, and we're probably going to enjoy our meals much more than we do now. So use these certain triggers throughout the day. On top of that, we can use technology as a trigger. For example, mobile phones now. There are many of apps available that have that function. You can program them to give a bell at regular intervals during the day. And when that bell goes off, then you stop whatever you do and do a little mindfulness exercise. Some of the apps have a little mindfulness exercise built in. If not, simply stop whatever you're doing and be present. Maybe focus on your breathing for 3 breaths. Look at the state of your mind for 10 seconds. Very short mindfulness exercise. And if you might be surprised how this very short mindfulness exercise interdispersed throughout the day starts to get us in the habit of being mindful, being present. So these things can be very, very helpful. Then, of course, to use that mindfulness to be present with everything in our life. And here, in terms of the Vipashyana practice, particularly this practice of emptiness, the emptiness practice, often we hear these terms actually. That emptiness practice, the first part of emptiness practice is called space-like emptiness. This is talking about the meditation practice of emptiness. Because remember, in emptiness meditation, you know, if we're looking for the person, this independent findable person that seems to be here, we search, and we don't find this me, that not finding is a space-like experience, an absence. So this is talking about the meditation on emptiness. And then the emptiness practice, of course, is what to do in daily life. And that is often called illusory-like emptiness practice. So the daily life practice of emptiness is simply to see things like an illusion, which means in daily life to question appearances. Because now when something appears, we automatically accept, yes, that thing is existing independent of me. Now, based on our understanding of emptiness and our meditation on emptiness, start to question appearances. This thing really looks like it's independent of me, but from my understanding and meditation, I know it's not. This is particularly useful in situations where the experience evokes a reaction, particularly when we experience pleasant and unpleasant things. Illusory-like emptiness can be very helpful. If we are having a pleasant experience that's starting to evoke some attachment, we can do this illusory-like practice. We can go, this thing really looks beautiful from its own side. It really looks like the beauty is there. Is the beauty there? Where is the beauty in the object? And we can try to find that beauty. And we can realize that actually there's no beauty to be found there, that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And then by doing this illusory-like emptiness practice, we can simply enjoy that experience without the attachment. Or similarly, if we're meeting something unpleasant and we're starting to have aversion, we can also do this illusory-like practice. There really looks like some unattractive thing in the object. Where is the unattractiveness in that object? And again, to investigate, to come to see we are creating that through our mind, and thereby to stop the aversion to that unpleasant situation. So again, this illusory-like emptiness practice is particularly useful in that case. Also, we can apply this when we meet people. When, for example, we are reacting, we're getting angry or upset. We can do that. Where is this angry me that seems to be here? Or we can do it towards the other person. And in that way, we can dissolve that reaction by doing this illusory-like emptiness practice, seeing everything like an illusion. And then, of course, also in particularly difficult situations or where there's suffering involved, as we saw earlier this afternoon, we can either do the illusory-like emptiness practice, or we can use the other wing of practice, the compassion practice, in terms of Tonglen. When we see ourselves or others suffering, we can do the Tonglen practice to be helpful. So we can mix that up. You know, sometimes we do the illusory-like, sometimes the Tonglen. So we can use them appropriately in different situations. So we can use both the wisdom and compassion practices in daily life, particularly in difficult situations, to benefit from those difficult situations, to use them as possibilities of learning rather than seeing them as problems and obstacles and reacting to them. And then it's also helpful at the end of the day to finish the day on a good note. So here we can do a couple of things. Of course, if we have time and energy at the end of the day to meditate again, great. Another meditation session, very good. But maybe many of us pretty tired at the end of the day. Maybe we are not up to doing that meditation practice. But still, I think we can do two things to finish the day on a good note. First thing we can do is to do before we go to bed, to do a review of our day. How did our day go? And there, I think there's two things we can do. We can focus on the negative thoughts, verbal and physical behavior, and the positive thoughts, verbal, physical behavior. And maybe pick the top three from each side. So the top three negative things that we thought, said, or did, what we can do with those three is we can, what's called in Buddhism, purify. So there are 4 things we can do that are very helpful. The first, and they're called the 4 opponent powers. The first is have sincere regret for that negative behavior. So remember again, don't do the cognitive fusion, because if you do that, you're just going to go, oh, I was very bad today. And then you're just going to feel guilty. So rather have the correct perspective and simply acknowledge, I have done this harmful thing today, this harmful behavior. We can have sincere regret for that behavior and have compassion for ourselves. So that sincere regret will already weaken that behavior. The second thing we can do is what's called often reliance. And reliance, sometimes translated as foundation. And this is talking about simply reaffirming the positive direction of our life. Because if we've done something harmful, we've sort of fallen down from our foundation in life, our direction in life. So here it's just about reaffirming the positive direction we want to follow in our life. Of course, if we're following the Buddhist path, particularly if we're following the Mahayana path, this often involves reaffirming this aspiration of bodhicitta. The third thing we can do is remedy. Think of some sort of practical remedy for that negative behavior. For example, if you realize you had said something very harsh to someone at work, very hurtful, then a remedy can be, okay, tomorrow I'm going to apologize to that person. Some very practical remedy. And the fourth thing we can do is resolve, to make a strong resolution not to do that negative thing again. But here we need to be also very practical. If the negative thing we did is something we do very often, there's no point in here saying, I'm never going to do it again. It's not going to happen. So, you know, if we're the sort of person that actually tells quite a lot of lies every day, no point here saying I'm never going to lie again, because we've just actually told another lie. So rather here, if it's a thing that we are doing a lot, set a time limit and say, okay, tomorrow for the next 24 hours, I'm not going to do that thing. If that's way too difficult, for the next hour, I'm not going to do that thing. If that's way too difficult, for the next 5 minutes, I'm not going to do that thing. So pick an amount of time that with effort, normally you can manage. And then over time, you can extend that from 5 minutes to 10 minutes to an hour to a day, or a week, a month, a year, the rest of your life. And that way you can even break very strong negative habits. So if we can do this with the top 3 negative things at the end of every day, this is a very good practical way of dealing with those negative habits and letting go of them and hopefully weakening them as well. But I think equally important, we focus on the top positive 3 things we did during the day. Because we always, in our modern society, focus on the negative, plus with cognitive fusion. So here, of course, we're not doing cognitive fusion and just having low self-esteem and guilt and so forth. We're simply acknowledging and going through these 4 steps. Same with the positive, top 3 positive things. Don't identify with them. Don't do cognitive fusion. You just get a big head. Rather, what we can do with the positive, top 3 positive things, first, rejoice. Again, rejoice in the behavior. Don't praise yourself. Rejoice in the behavior. Be happy about doing that good thing, having done that good thing, and then make a strong resolve to continue to do that good thing the following day. In that way, it strengthens our positive behaviors, the habits. So that's one thing we can do at the end of the day, definitely. Keep it simple. If we make it too elaborate, takes too much time, we're just going to stop doing it. So I suggest maybe the top 3 of each, no more. Otherwise, if you make it too much, then you'll just give up because it'll take too much time. So just stick to the top 3, negative, positive, and do those steps. Maybe takes a few minutes, and that's a good way to finish. Then the last thing we can do is when we go to bed, lie down in the corpse posture, the Shavasana, which we've practiced a few times now, and lie there in the corpse posture and then do a mindfulness exercise. Simply become aware of sensations of the breath throughout the body, relaxing. So this is then a shamatha practice, strengthening mindfulness. Also by doing this, it's a way of releasing any tension from the day, because often at the end of the day, go, 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 go. Maybe still a lot of tension in the body and the mind from the day, so we can release that tension. And also, of course, it's a very good transition into sleep. So do this practice as long as you can maintain some alertness, which may be just 2 or 3 minutes, maybe 10 or 15 minutes. When you start to get drowsy, then mentally note, okay, my meditation's finished, move out of that posture into whatever posture you use for sleep. So this is a very good way for transitioning into sleep, cultivating mindfulness, releasing tension. So this is certainly something we can do at the end of every day. Very helpful. So this is a little bit of advice about how we can set up our day. The very last point, and then we've run out of time, maybe any last question, is with this Vipashyana practice, for reading material, the book I tend to recommend is the one I've already recommended, the How to See Yourself as You Really Are by His Holiness Dalai Lama. I think this is a very good introductory book, very clear, has meditation exercises at the end of every chapter. More than that, then also you can have a look on my website. glensvensson.org. So I've stuck quite a lot of audio from various teachings and retreats on there, lots of charts and materials on there. So help yourself to whatever you find on there, and maybe something there useful as well. And then the very last point on that is with this Vipashyana practice, of course, it's very profound, and so therefore it's very helpful to listen to teachings and from different people to get different perspectives, of course, to reflect on and meditate, and also very helpful then to engage in some sort of meditation retreat. So a regular meditation retreat for Vipashyana or Shamatha or any of these practices is very helpful, at least if you can manage once or twice a year to engage in a retreat. And as a beginner, very much recommended group retreat, because there's structure, someone's guiding it, and you get the group energy. So if you can find the time in your hectic calendar to devote 1 or 2 weeks a year to doing some sort of group meditation retreat, very helpful. So that's all I wanted to mention. Any last question before we finish this weekend?
No question, just to say thank you.
Okay, then I'd like to just finish by first off thanking the centre here for inviting me here, and for the volunteers for doing such a good job of looking after me and preparing everything for this retreat, and for the the 10 days I've been here. And lastly, I'd like to thank, of course, all of you for making the time and effort to come here. And I hope that you really received some benefit out of this weekend retreat, and hope to see you again in the not too distant future. So thank you.